The small, forgotten village of rural France, tucked away from the bustle of modernity, holds a strange and eerie secret. In the quiet, fog-covered hills where time seems to move slower than in the rest of the world, something incredible and terrifying occurred. In the mid-1800s, a group of children in this isolated village began to exhibit a strange, almost supernatural condition. After reaching puberty, they simply stopped aging. Their bodies, trapped in time, refused to follow the natural course of human development. They were no longer children, yet they were not adults. They were stuck, suspended in an unchanging state, as though their very biology had rebelled against the relentless march of time. At first, it seemed to be nothing more than an odd curiosity, an anomaly that no one could quite explain. Local villagers whispered about the strange children, with their youthful appearances remaining constant year after year. These were children who were no longer children, their faces unmarked by the passing years, their bodies frozen in the cusp of adolescence. How could this be? Was this a gift, or a curse? And, most importantly, what was the cause behind it? As the years went on, the mystery deepened. Medical professionals from surrounding towns traveled to investigate, intrigued by the stories they had heard. They were hoping to unravel the bizarre phenomenon that had captured the imagination of the community. Yet, the more they delved into the lives of these children, the more complex and unnerving the mystery became. Some doctors speculated that it might be a rare genetic disorder, a freak mutation of the human body that defied the expected rules of aging. Others wondered if it could be a psychological condition, something within the children's minds that prevented their bodies from maturing. Some even turned to superstitions, suggesting that a curse or some unknown force was at play. But none of these explanations could provide the clarity that the village so desperately needed. The children who stopped aging were not the only ones caught in the web of this bizarre phenomenon. Their families, too, became part of the story. Families who struggled to explain what was happening to their children, who had to live under the weight of a strange burden. How did one raise a child who was not growing? How did the villagers interact with these eternal children? Was it a blessing to be frozen in time, or a curse to live in a perpetual state of incompletion? The more the villagers discussed it, the more they realized that they couldn't answer these questions. They could only speculate. The longer the condition persisted, the more people began to wonder whether the children would ever age, or if they were destined to live forever in their frozen state. The historical context of 19th century France provides some clues as to why this phenomenon would have been so shocking. France in the 1800s was a land of vast contrasts, from the elegant boulevards of Paris to the quiet, rural villages where time seemed to stand still. Medicine was still in its infancy, with treatments often more harmful than helpful, and medical professionals were just beginning to understand the complexities of the human body. Diseases that are now understood, such as cancer, diabetes, and genetic disorders, were largely mysteries. There was no way to fathom how something like this could happen. The idea that a child's body could remain forever in a state of arrested development was not only puzzling, it was inconceivable. What would it mean for society if such a condition were real? What implications would it have for our understanding of aging, health, and mortality? Despite the fascination that the case garnered, the truth was, no one knew what was happening. The children in the village did not show any outward signs of illness, yet they were not growing, their bodies stagnant, trapped in a time bubble. This phenomenon couldn't be explained away as a simple medical condition, like a hormone imbalance or a genetic mutation that had yet to be understood. There was something more mysterious at work, and it was that very mystery that kept scientists, doctors, and curious minds coming back again and again. It was as though the universe itself was playing some cruel trick on the village, withholding the key to understanding the condition and pushing the limits of scientific reasoning. Some experts, however, believed they could be witnessing something beyond the realm of ordinary biology. Could this be the result of some kind of divine intervention, a blessing, or perhaps a curse, bestowed upon these children? Or was it something more extraordinary? Was there some deeper genetic force, some long-hidden anomaly in the human genome, that could account for this strange phenomenon? Even more unsettling, could this be the harbinger of something far darker, a glimpse into the future of humanity? Could it be that the boundary between life and death, youth and age, was not as firm as we believed? As scientists from across Europe began to investigate, their findings were inconclusive, yet all agreed that the children represented something extraordinary. Some theorized that the children's bodies had somehow been locked in a state of perpetual youth due to a rare genetic mutation, one that inhibited the usual biological processes of aging. Others believed it was possible that the children's metabolic systems had simply slowed to such an extent that they no longer experienced the effects of time. This, however, was simply speculation, and no one had any concrete answers. But as the children grew older, without truly aging, it became increasingly clear that whatever was happening to them, it was no ordinary medical condition. Time seemed to pass them by, but their bodies did not change. They grew taller, but their faces remained youthful, untouched by the inevitable passage of years. There were whispers among the villagers that these children were no longer human, or at least not entirely. Were they some kind of anomaly, a freak occurrence that couldn't be understood within the bounds of current science? Or were they something else altogether? For the families of these children, the situation was not only mysterious, it was deeply unsettling. While other children grew older, started to develop into young adults, and began the normal trajectory of life, the eternal children did not. There were no clear answers. Could they ever grow up? Would they ever age? The families of these children were left to cope with the unknown. It was a burden that no one had asked for, yet they had to carry it every day, living with the uncertainty and fear of not knowing what would happen next. Would their children be forever frozen in time, or would they eventually face the inevitable toll of aging that every other human body must bear? The questions grew louder with every passing year. The condition of these children was a riddle wrapped in a mystery, and for some, it seemed as though the answer could never be found. There was an unsettling sense of helplessness in the village, a sense that no one, not even the most brilliant minds, could truly comprehend what was happening. The more they learned, the more they realized that they understood less than ever. These children defied every scientific principle known to humankind. Perhaps what was most unsettling about the whole affair was that, as time went on, the phenomenon did not seem to be a mere curiosity. It began to feel like a living, breathing question. A question that could never be answered. It felt as though these children had become symbols of everything humanity could not control. They were living paradoxes, suspended between two worlds, children, yet not children, living, yet not fully alive. And this, perhaps, is what made their story so compelling. The mystery of their existence was not merely a question of biology or genetics. It was a question of life itself. As the years stretched on, the children, now young adults, continued to live as they always had, frozen in a state of adolescence, unable to fully experience the world as it was meant to be. The village, though initially curious, began to view them with growing discomfort, as though they were a constant reminder of nature's power and its limitations. The rest of the world looked on from a distance, puzzled, intrigued, and perhaps a little fearful of the mystery that remained unsolved. The children who stopped aging had become a living enigma, an enduring symbol of the unknown forces that could shape our lives, and an unsettling reminder of how much we still have to learn about the human body, genetics, and the very nature of existence. The question remains, could there be others like them, hidden in the shadows of history, waiting to be discovered? And if so, what other dark secrets of the human body could they unlock? To truly understand the mystery of the children who stopped aging, one must first delve into the very nature of biological aging itself. Aging, as we know it, is an intricate process, the gradual breakdown of cells, tissues, and organs that leads to the eventual decline of the body's abilities. It is a universal experience, shared by every living organism, governed by the complex interactions of genetics, environmental factors, and time. Yet, for these children in rural France, time itself seemed to cease its inevitable march forward. It was as if their very biology had resisted the fundamental process of aging, refusing to succumb to the effects that usually accompany growing up. This anomaly defied all known principles of biology, medicine, and genetics, leaving both the people who lived through it and the scientists who studied it in a state of bewilderment. At the heart of this enigma lies the question, why do we age in the first place? To answer this, we must explore the basic mechanisms that govern the aging process. Aging is driven by a combination of genetic programming and cellular damage. As we age, our cells begin to lose their ability to divide and repair themselves. Telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes, shorten with each cell division, eventually leading to cell death or senescence. This process is often referred to as the Hayflick limit, named after the scientist who discovered that human cells can only divide a finite number of times before they stop. This cellular aging is also compounded by the accumulation of DNA damage, oxidative stress, and the gradual breakdown of molecular structures. The body's systems, once efficient in youth, become less coordinated and less capable of maintaining homeostasis as we grow older. However, For these children, the expected markers of aging, telomere shortening, cellular breakdown, the loss of function in organs and tissues, simply did not occur. Their bodies, once they reached puberty, ceased to show any further signs of aging. In a world where biological processes were supposed to follow a strict, predictable path, these children stood as an anomaly, a living contradiction. Their cells did not seem to follow the rules of aging. Their telomeres, typically shortening with each replication of cells, appeared to have remained intact, or at least their shortening process was so slow that it defied detection. What was happening in their bodies? Was it a malfunction of nature, a freak occurrence, or could there be something far more extraordinary at play? For centuries, scientists have speculated about the possibility of eternal youth or immortality, but these speculations have always been relegated to the realm of myth, legend, and fantasy. Yet, here was something that seemed to challenge this conventional wisdom. The children who stopped aging were no longer mere subjects of myth or story. They were living, breathing evidence of an anomaly that threatened to shake the very foundations of what humanity thought it understood about life and death. And though the condition was not quite immortality, it was nonetheless an extraordinary mystery that demanded answers. To unravel this puzzle, scientists have long looked to the field of genetics for an explanation. Genetics, the study of heredity and the variation of inherited characteristics, is perhaps the most powerful tool in understanding human biology. It is through our genes that our bodies develop, grow, and age. Genes, composed of DNA, encode the instructions for building and maintaining the body. These instructions, however, are not always perfect. Mutations, changes in the genetic code, can lead to a variety of conditions, some beneficial, many detrimental. In some cases, mutations can result in extraordinary abilities, such as resistance to disease, or even an extended lifespan. Could these children's bodies be the result of such a mutation, one that had never been seen before? One of the most intriguing possibilities that emerged from early investigations into this phenomenon was the idea that the children might possess a rare genetic mutation, one that had prevented the normal aging process. This theory hinged on the idea that their genetic makeup was somehow different from the norm. If their genes could somehow switch off the process of aging, these children might be the living embodiment of a biological miracle, an anomaly that, by all accounts, should not have existed. Could they possess a genetic code that was immune to the ravages of time? Could their bodies have been designed, whether by nature or fate, to remain forever youthful? Such a theory was not without precedent. In the modern era, scientists have discovered a number of genetic disorders that influence the rate of aging. One of the most well-known of these is progeria, a rare genetic condition that causes children to age at an extraordinarily rapid rate, appearing decades older than they actually are. In contrast, there are other rare conditions that seem to slow or alter the aging process, though they are far less understood. Could the children in this French village have been afflicted with a similarly rare genetic mutation, one that altered the biological clocks within their cells? In order to investigate this theory, researchers would need to explore the children's genetic makeup in depth. They would need to study their DNA, comparing it with that of other children and adults, looking for markers or mutations that could explain the anomaly. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, the tools needed for such an investigation were not yet available. The science of genetics, as we understand it today, was in its infancy, and techniques like DNA sequencing were still more than a century away. What the doctors of the time had at their disposal were only rudimentary tests, along with their own observations and theories. This lack of modern scientific tools only deepened the mystery, leaving many to speculate wildly about the causes of the phenomenon. Some suggested that the children's condition might be the result of a hormonal imbalance, perhaps a malfunction in the endocrine system that kept their bodies from maturing. The endocrine system is responsible for producing the hormones that regulate growth, metabolism, and sexual development. A disruption in this delicate system could, in theory, cause a stunted or arrested development. But even this theory seemed too simplistic to explain what was happening. After all, the children didn't just show delayed development, they seemed to have simply stopped growing altogether. Others wondered if the children might have been affected by environmental factors, something in the air, water, or soil that was having a profound impact on their biology. Perhaps the conditions of rural France, isolated, untouched by industrial progress, had somehow influenced the children's bodies in a way that was still beyond human understanding. Were they the result of an undetected toxin, a virus, or some other external agent? It seemed unlikely, but not entirely impossible. Despite these speculations, no explanation seemed to fit perfectly. And with the passage of time, the mystery only deepened. The children who had once been thought to be the subjects of a curious medical condition were now something more. They were living testaments to the unknown. They were challenging every scientific principle, every assumption that had been made about aging and human biology. This mystery raised an even deeper question, one that went beyond the realm of genetics and biology. If these children were somehow immune to the effects of aging, what did that mean for the rest of humanity? Could there be other individuals or populations who possessed this genetic anomaly? Were we on the brink of discovering a new branch of human evolution, one that allowed people to live indefinitely in a state of perpetual youth? Or was this just a freak occurrence, something that could never be replicated or explained? As scientists pondered these questions, the children remained trapped in their suspended state, their lives unchanged by the passage of time. They had become living symbols of the mystery that had yet to be solved, a mystery that seemed to defy all logic, all understanding. And as the search for answers continued, the children who stopped aging remained a powerful reminder of how much there was still to learn about the complexities of the human body and the forces that shape life itself. The village in rural France, nestled in the sweeping hills that rolled across the countryside, seemed like a place where time itself had slowed. The narrow cobblestone streets, the stone cottages with their flower-covered windowsills, the thick forests that encircled the village like protective walls, everything about the place suggested a world that had remained largely untouched by the advancing tide of industrialization. In the 1800s, this village was a haven of simplicity and tradition, where the daily rhythms of life were dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, by the harvests of the season, and by the generational knowledge passed down from parent to child. Life was hard in many ways, but it was predictable, rooted in ancient customs that had been practiced for centuries. Yet, amid this peaceful rural landscape, something strange and unsettling was unfolding, a mystery that would send ripples through the village for generations. The children, once seemingly ordinary, had begun to exhibit an extraordinary condition. They had stopped aging. This peculiar phenomenon did not announce itself with the dramatic flair of a natural disaster or an epidemic. Instead, it unfolded quietly, over time, as these children, once on the cusp of adulthood, began to grow older without growing up. They stopped changing, their bodies arrested in time, locked in a perpetual state of adolescence. This was not a mere delay in the process of maturation. It was something more profound, more mysterious, something that seemed to challenge the very laws of nature. At first, no one paid much attention to the children. In a small, isolated village like this, where most people knew each other by name and where life proceeded in a predictable manner, the occasional oddity was not a cause for alarm. Children were known to grow at different rates, to mature at different ages. Some were taller than others, some looked younger for their years, some showed signs of advanced maturity while others lagged behind. It was not unusual for children to reach puberty at different times. But as the months passed and then years, it became impossible to ignore that something unusual was happening to these particular children. They were not growing older, not maturing in the way they were supposed to. There was no clear dividing line at first, no exact moment when the change was noticed. But gradually, people began to see the strange stases. The children were growing in height, but their faces, their bodies, remained unchanged. Their features did not carry the marks of age. No signs of adulthood emerged. Their eyes remained as wide and innocent as they had been in childhood. Their skin stayed as smooth as that of a young adolescent. Time, it seemed, had no hold on them. The village took notice. Conversations, initially hushed, began to circulate, and soon everyone was talking about the children who had not aged. The families of these children were the first to feel the weight of this strange condition. They were the ones who saw, day after day, their children's faces remaining forever youthful, even as the world around them continued to change. They watched as their children's peers grew into young men and women, experiencing the inevitable stages of life, becoming adults, falling in love, raising families of their own. But the children who had stopped aging remained untouched by this progression. They were frozen in time, stuck in the liminal space between childhood and adulthood, a place where the normal course of human development simply didn't apply. These children were not sick, not dying, but neither were they fully alive in the way the rest of the world understood life. They existed in a state of suspension, their identities and futures hanging in limbo. For the families, this condition was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, there was an undeniable sense of awe and wonder. Their children would never have to face the physical decline that aging inevitably brought. They would not grow frail, grow old, or succumb to the diseases of age. They would always have the vitality of youth, a gift that many would envy. But on the other hand, there was something deeply unnerving about the situation. These children were no longer children. They had stopped progressing, and their families could only wonder what their futures would look like. What kind of lives would they lead, trapped in this stasis? What would their relationships with others look like if they never grew older, never matured in the way other people did? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what did it mean for their existence that they were not aging? The villagers, too, began to view these children with a mixture of fascination and fear. At first, the strange phenomenon was simply a subject of gossip, curiosity about what could possibly explain it. But as time passed, it became something more than just a local oddity. It became a source of superstition and speculation. In a world still governed by mystery and fear of the unknown, the villagers turned to their traditional beliefs to try to make sense of what was happening. Some whispered that the children were cursed, that some ancient power or spirit had stopped the natural process of aging in its tracks. Others believed that the children were the product of some divine intervention, a blessing, or a warning from the gods. The more the villagers speculated, the more the mystery deepened. No one knew what to make of the children, and no one could find an answer. The medical knowledge of the time was limited at best. Doctors in the region were baffled. They had no framework, no scientific understanding to explain the situation. They had no knowledge of genetics, no knowledge of hormones and their role in growth and development, and certainly no understanding of the complexities of human biology that we now take for granted. Their best guesses ranged from the possibility of a rare disease to the idea that these children were simply the victims of some strange environmental factor, perhaps a chemical in the water, or some mutation caused by the conditions of the land. But these theories, though they made some sense in the absence of real knowledge, were not sufficient to explain the children's condition. What made the situation even more perplexing was that, despite the villagers' growing interest, no one seemed to have any real understanding of the underlying cause. This was not a common affliction. It wasn't something that could be easily attributed to genetics, environment, or even a rare disease. No other children in the village were affected. It was just these particular children, and their families, who were caught in this strange loop of existence. It was as though they had become the subjects of a cosmic experiment, forced to live in a world where the rules of biology and nature no longer applied. And that, perhaps, is what made it so disturbing. The world around them continued to change. People grew older, generations passed, but these children remained the same, locked in a moment of time that could not be explained. The longer the mystery persisted, the more it came to symbolize the fragility of human life, the limitations of scientific knowledge, and the power of the unknown. It was a mystery that no one seemed able to solve, a puzzle that only deepened the more people tried to understand it. And so, the village continued on, its inhabitants forever haunted by the image of these children who had stopped aging, their faces forever frozen in time, their lives suspended in a moment between childhood and adulthood. In the years that followed, as the children remained trapped in their strange state, the mystery of their condition would continue to resonate far beyond the borders of their small village. It would spark questions and debates that would echo through the halls of scientific inquiry, raising profound questions about the nature of human life, the aging process, and the limits of what we know. But for the villagers who had lived alongside these children, the mystery was never fully resolved. It was a riddle that time itself seemed to keep locked away, a secret that would remain buried in the past, unanswered, forever. In the years that followed the discovery of this strange phenomenon, the attention of the scientific community and curious outsiders alike began to focus on the village and the children at the center of the mystery. The village, once a quiet, forgotten corner of rural France, found itself thrust into the spotlight. People from far and wide arrived, eager to uncover the truth behind the children who stopped aging. Their motives were varied. Some sought to unlock a breakthrough in medical science, others were driven by sheer curiosity or superstition, and still, others came seeking answers to questions that had long lingered in the realms of the unknown. The more outsiders came, the more it seemed that the village itself was on the precipice of becoming the center of a larger, more profound inquiry into the nature of life, aging, and perhaps even the very fabric of human existence. The first to arrive were the local physicians and doctors, familiar faces to the villagers who had long depended on their medical care for everything from common ailments to more serious concerns. Yet, the situation with these children was unlike anything they had ever encountered. They were no longer just medical professionals. Now, they were investigators, eager to uncover the root cause of the phenomenon. They began by conducting basic medical assessments, hoping that a thorough examination of the children's physical health might provide some clues. But as they conducted the tests, they were met with baffling results. The children's hearts were strong, their lungs clear, their blood work ordinary, with no sign of illness or genetic disorder. There were no outward signs of malfunction or disease. Their bodies, however frozen in time, were nonetheless healthy. There were no visible signs of the aging process, no wrinkles, no grey hair, no changes in their bone structure or muscle mass. Everything about their physical health appeared normal, even as the rest of the world moved forward with the inexorable passage of time. Over time, the doctors tried various methods to understand the situation, working from what little knowledge they had at their disposal. They considered the possibility of a hormonal imbalance, but this theory seemed insufficient to explain the complete stasis in the children's aging. While it was true that certain hormonal imbalances could cause delays in development, none could explain the complete cessation of aging altogether. No hormone could be responsible for halting time in such a way. There were discussions about genetic mutations, an abnormality, a mutation in the genes that controlled growth and aging. This seemed the most plausible explanation, but no one could identify any known mutations that would produce such a result. The doctors were, in essence, grasping at straws. They had no way of making sense of the phenomenon with the tools they had available to them. The scientific community, too, was intrigued. News of the children reached researchers and scholars in major cities, and soon a variety of experts from different fields were arriving in the village. They came from a broad range of specialties, from biologists and geneticists to anthropologists and even occult scholars. Some believed that the answer to the mystery lay in biology, while others felt that the children might represent something more metaphysical, a phenomenon that transcended the physical world and ventured into realms of the supernatural or divine. Among the first to visit was a renowned biologist from Paris who had a deep interest in genetics, though at that time, genetics as a science was still in its infancy. He arrived with a team of researchers and began examining the children more closely, hoping to uncover some clue that might explain their stunted aging. The village, with its centuries-old traditions and isolation, had remained largely untouched by the modern world. The biologist, eager to collect as much information as possible, set about conducting a variety of tests. He took blood samples, tissue samples, and performed a range of physical examinations, comparing the children's biological markers to those of other children from the village, as well as children from larger towns. His team worked tirelessly, cataloging data, measuring growth, and trying to track any inconsistencies or abnormalities in the children's physiology. The more they examined, the more baffled they became. The children were not diseased, their bodies were not frail or deteriorating. They were simply stuck, suspended in the developmental phase of youth. The most perplexing aspect of the children's condition was their continued growth in height. They were physically maturing in one aspect, becoming taller, yet their features remained fixed in a youthful state. Their bones did not appear to be aging or deteriorating, and their skin remained smooth and unmarked by time. Their bodies, though growing, were not progressing in the way they should have been. Their faces were untouched by the typical signs of maturation. No adult features, no changes in their facial structure. They had reached puberty, yes, but their bodies refused to develop further. In fact, it was as if their bodies were caught in a strange limbo, a place where they had evolved to a certain point, but could not advance beyond it. As the biologist and his team continued their work, they came to one unsettling conclusion. They could not find any logical explanation for what was happening. Their tests yielded no answers, their theories no closure. The children seemed to defy the most basic laws of biology and genetics. The biologist speculated that the condition might be the result of a previously unknown genetic mutation, a rare condition that had not been documented in medical literature. However, without access to modern genetic tools, such as DNA sequencing, there was no way to confirm or deny this hypothesis. Despite the lack of concrete answers, the investigation continued. The children, though growing taller, remained in a strange state of suspended adolescence. This stasis became even more pronounced as the years passed. What was once an oddity had become a source of fascination and speculation, a puzzle that no one could solve. Some researchers began to question whether there was an environmental factor at play, perhaps something in the local water, or the soil, or even the climate. The village had been isolated from the outside world for generations, and it was conceivable that some environmental condition unique to the area might have contributed to the children's strange condition. Yet, no such explanation could be found. The environment was relatively unchanged, and no signs of illness or contamination were present in the local community. Still, the mystery remained. As the years went by, some villagers began to believe that the children were somehow connected to the divine, or that they were the victims of a curse. Superstitions flourished, and some even saw the children as a sign of something larger, a portent of a greater truth that had yet to be revealed. The idea that the children were supernatural beings, or that they had been touched by some otherworldly force, began to gain traction among the more religious members of the community. The notion that their condition was the result of divine intervention, either as a blessing or a curse, became an increasingly popular theory. Some villagers believed that the children were the chosen ones, marked for some special purpose that had yet to be understood. Others feared that their stasis was a punishment, a warning from the heavens. Despite the ongoing scientific investigations and the growing theories about the nature of the children's condition, no one could provide a definitive answer. The more people searched for explanations, the more elusive the truth became. And as time passed, the mystery only deepened. The children, now young adults, continued to live, seemingly unaffected by the passing years, trapped in a strange stasis between childhood and adulthood. It was as if they existed in a space that defied the ordinary flow of time, a place where age held no dominion. The scientific community was not the only group to become intrigued by the mystery. Anthropologists, too, began to take an interest. They saw the children as a possible link to understanding the nature of human development and the limits of human biology. Was this phenomenon an anomaly, a freak occurrence that could never be replicated, or did it represent something deeper, something more fundamental about the human condition? Some theorists began to question whether these children might hold the key to unlocking the future of human evolution, whether they were a glimpse of what humanity might become, a new stage of existence beyond the ordinary constraints of aging and mortality. But no matter how hard people tried to understand, the children remained enigmatic, their condition as baffling as ever. As the years went on, the investigation seemed to stall, the answers remaining just out of reach. What was happening to them? Why did they not age? No one could say for sure. And as time continued to pass, the village remained a place of quiet mystery, a place where questions about life, death, and time itself were left unanswered, a place where the boundaries between science and the supernatural, between the known and the unknown, blurred into an impossible riddle. As the years passed, the lives of the children who had stopped aging took on a peculiar and unsettling quality. They were no longer the small, innocent children that had once captivated the village. Now, as young adults who looked unchanged from their adolescent years, they became a living testament to the unknown, a living paradox, forever suspended between childhood and adulthood. For those who had known them since their earliest years, the transformation, or rather, the absence of transformation, was both haunting and perplexing. The children's parents, who had once looked forward to seeing their children grow into young adults, were now faced with the reality of raising children who would never truly grow up. Their days were marked by an unchanging rhythm, where the passage of time felt like a slow-moving current that barely seemed to affect them. The once bright-eyed children, who had played in the fields and wandered through the forests of the village, now moved through life with the quiet dignity of those caught in a strange limbo. They interacted with others, but there was always a sense of distance, an invisible barrier that separated them from the world of ordinary humans. While the rest of the village aged, married, had children, and carried on with the predictable course of life, these children were stuck in a perpetual state of adolescence. They had no experience of the milestones that others took for granted, no school graduations, no romantic relationships, no coming-of-age ceremonies. They existed in a timeless space, a moment suspended between the innocent years of childhood and the responsibilities and complexities of adulthood. For the parents of these children, this unyielding stasis presented a difficult, almost cruel paradox. On one hand, they had the joy of knowing that their children would never experience the physical decline that comes with aging. There would be no illnesses brought on by old age, no frailty, no losing the ability to walk, to think, to remember. Their children would always have the vitality of youth, their bodies perpetually capable, never succumbing to the ravages of time. This was, in many ways, a blessing, one that most parents could only dream of. But there was also a deep sorrow in the reality of this condition. These children, though perpetually youthful, were never able to experience life as others did. They would never grow up, never mature, never experience the emotional and psychological growth that comes with adulthood. They would never know what it was like to fall in love, to get married, to have children of their own. They were forever frozen in time, caught in a stasis that left them yearning for something they could never reach. This emotional weight was not just felt by the children's families, it rippled throughout the entire community. As time passed, the village began to change. The once innocent curiosity that had greeted the children's strange condition shifted to something more akin to fear and discomfort. People who had once been fascinated by the children's mystery began to see them as symbols of the unknown, reminders of the things that science could not explain and nature could not control. It was no longer just a medical anomaly, it had become a symbol of the fragility of the human condition, a reminder of how much was beyond understanding. The villagers, who had once treated these children with warmth and wonder, now regarded them with a sense of unease, as if they were no longer fully human. Some began to whisper about the possibility of divine intervention, suggesting that the children were blessed, or cursed, by higher powers. Others speculated that the children had been touched by forces far beyond the natural world, that their existence was part of a larger cosmic riddle that could never be solved. The discomfort surrounding the children was compounded by the fact that they were now teenagers trapped in bodies that refused to mature. Their interactions with the outside world, once simple and unencumbered by the complexities of age, now took on a darker, more awkward tone. As the children grew taller, their appearances were still those of adolescence: sharp cheekbones, smooth skin, wide, innocent eyes. Yet their actions, their mannerisms, and the way they moved through the world betrayed their perpetual youth. They were no longer children, yet they were not adults either. Their relationships with other people became strained, as it became increasingly difficult for those around them to understand what they truly were. Were they just children with some kind of medical condition, or were they something more? Were they frozen in time, or were they caught in an inescapable cycle of arrested development? The longer the children remained in this state, the more the people of the village struggled to define them, to place them in a category that made sense. Perhaps the most difficult aspect for the families to navigate was the changing emotional landscape of their children. Though their bodies refused to grow, the children's minds still functioned as they had before. Their intelligence, their emotional capacity, and their desires continued to evolve, even though they could not express those changes physically. The children who had once been carefree and innocent now began to wrestle with the complexities of their strange situation. They grew frustrated with their condition, unable to express the thoughts and feelings they had as they aged emotionally and mentally. Their frustrations were sometimes manifest in strange ways: mood swings, irritability, and even isolation. As they came to understand that they would never experience the normal progression of life, they began to grapple with the sense of isolation that this brought. While their peers aged, got married, and moved forward with their lives, they remained forever stuck in the years of adolescence, yearning for something they could never have. The social dynamics within the village were also affected by this strange stasis. It became clear that the children, despite their physical appearance, were no longer the same as everyone else. They were increasingly isolated from the rest of the community, not because of any overt rejection, but because of the subtle alienation that comes with being different. The villagers, once fascinated by the children, now viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. They were a constant reminder of the limits of human knowledge, of how little we understood about the body, the mind, and the forces that shaped life. The children became something of a local legend, a source of both wonder and fear. In the years to come, those who had known them would speak of them in hushed tones, as if discussing a dark secret that the village itself could not fully comprehend. For the children themselves, life became a quiet existence. They were no longer participants in the normal course of human development. They were observers, watching as their friends and family members moved through the stages of life they could never experience. They saw others grow into adulthood, form relationships, and begin families of their own. But for them, these milestones were always out of reach. There was a deep yearning within them, a longing to break free of the stasis they had been trapped in. Yet, no matter how much they wished for it, they could not escape. They were stuck, forever in a body that was neither child nor adult, forever existing in a time that was always just out of reach. This sense of isolation grew as the children became aware of their own situation. They were no longer unaware of the changes happening around them. They knew that they were different, and they knew that their future, unlike everyone else's, was uncertain. Would they remain in this suspended state forever? Would they ever grow old? Would they ever experience the things that other people did? These questions lingered in their minds, but the answers remained elusive. Despite the growing number of doctors and experts who came to examine them, no one could provide any clarity. The children were left with only their own thoughts and emotions, their own frustrations, and their own uncertainty. In the face of this emotional turmoil, The families of the children were forced to reconcile with the truth of their situation. They had no answers, no explanations, only a growing sense of helplessness. How do you raise a child who cannot grow? How do you help a child who is trapped in time, forever stuck in the years of adolescence, never able to experience the full breadth of life? These were questions with no easy answers. And as the years turned into decades, the families and the villagers alike were forced to come to terms with the reality that this strange phenomenon, this inexplicable mystery, was beyond their control. It was not a curse that could be lifted, nor a blessing that could be fully understood. It was simply an enduring riddle, one that would remain unsolved, a symbol of the limits of human understanding, forever imprinted on the lives of those who lived through it. As the children who had stopped aging grew older, their presence continued to stir unease, not only in the village but in the broader scientific community. By now, the intrigue surrounding them had evolved into a more pressing, almost obsessive pursuit of answers. The children were no longer just subjects of idle curiosity, they had become living testaments to the unknown. In the minds of many, they embodied an unsolvable mystery that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of medicine, biology, and even human comprehension. The longer the children remained in their ageless state, the more the world around them grappled with their true nature. They had become both a symbol of the limitations of science and a glimmer of hope for those who dared to dream of unlocking the secret to eternal youth. Their lives, frozen in time, were now the focus of both wonder and fear, a riddle that no one seemed able to solve. For the children themselves, as they grew into their teenage years and beyond, the weight of their condition became ever more apparent. Their bodies, though physically youthful, betrayed their minds, which had continued to grow and evolve. They had the intellectual capacity of adults but lacked the physical maturity that should have accompanied it. This strange dissonance between their mental and physical states led to a growing sense of frustration and isolation. They were trapped in bodies that refused to age, but their minds were not so easily contained. They were forced to experience the world in a way that no one else could truly understand. They were caught between two worlds, one where they had the knowledge and emotional depth of adults, and another where they were forever trapped in a state of physical adolescence. The result was a profound sense of alienation. Though the children's condition did not seem to cause them any immediate physical pain or discomfort, the emotional toll of being forever caught in a time warp was immense. As they matured intellectually, they began to understand the full scope of their situation. They saw others grow older, experience the rites of passage that defined human life, adulthood, marriage, the birth of children, the accumulation of experience that comes with living. But these things were out of reach for them. They watched as their peers moved through life, and they began to question their own place in the world. Why were they not able to age? Why were they trapped in this perpetual cycle of youth? The emotional toll of being perpetually stuck in adolescence, with the mind and heart of an adult, was nothing short of overwhelming. The questions they grappled with were not just scientific, they were deeply personal. Would they ever find a way to escape this strange stasis? Would they always be the subjects of curiosity and fear, never allowed to live the life they had once dreamed of? Despite the confusion and isolation they felt, the children still had to navigate the world around them. Their relationships with others became more complicated as they grew older. They had the appearance of teenagers, but their behavior and intellectual capabilities were far beyond that. They were still capable of forming emotional connections, but the dissonance between their outward appearance and inner maturity made it difficult for others to see them as they truly were. They were no longer seen as innocent children, but neither were they seen as full adults. People viewed them with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. While some villagers treated them with kindness and respect, others viewed them with suspicion, unsure of how to categorize them. Were they truly human, or were they something else? Their perpetual youth challenged the very notion of what it meant to be human. In a society where aging and maturation were seen as inevitable, these children seemed to stand as a stark reminder that life was not as predictable as it appeared. And so, they were left to navigate a world that no longer had a place for them, a world where they could not fit in, not because they were unwanted, but because they defied the fundamental rules that governed it. The village itself, once a close-knit and supportive community, began to feel the strain of the children's anomaly. What had started as an odd curiosity had slowly transformed into something darker, something unsettling. The villagers had begun to question their beliefs, to ask themselves whether this phenomenon was a sign of something supernatural. Some believed that the children had been chosen by God for some divine purpose, while others feared that their condition was the result of a curse. The mystery of the children's agelessness seemed to challenge the natural order of life, and this stirred something deep within the hearts of the villagers, a sense of unease that was hard to shake. The children were no longer just a medical oddity or an unexplained phenomenon. They were now symbols of something far more profound, something that existed on the borders of life and death, time and eternity. Despite the growing discomfort among the villagers, the children's families remained steadfast in their love and care for them. The families had grown used to the peculiarities of their children's condition, but that did not make it any easier to cope with. The parents, who had once hoped to see their children grow up and experience the world in the normal way, were now forced to contend with the reality that their children would never age, never grow older, and never experience the milestones that others took for granted. There were no graduations, no first loves, no adulthood to look forward to. Their children would remain forever young, forever trapped in a moment that was both a gift and a curse. And so, the families continued to care for their children, providing them with the love and support they needed, even as they watched the world around them change in ways that their children could never experience. The arrival of new doctors, scientists, and researchers only deepened the mystery of the children's condition. They had the best of intentions, of course, but the answers they sought remained elusive. Some of the scientists who arrived in the village were hopeful that they could uncover the cause of the children's strange condition, while others were simply fascinated by the possibility of studying a phenomenon that had never been observed before. There was a sense that the village had become the center of an international scientific inquiry, and yet, no one had the tools to fully comprehend what was happening. The children, though the subjects of intense study, remained as mysterious as ever. The medical experts, despite their best efforts, could not find any explanation for the children's condition. Their bodies appeared healthy and strong, but there were no answers as to why they had stopped aging. Some researchers speculated that the children's agelessness was a result of a rare genetic mutation, one that had not yet been documented in human history. This theory was based on the idea that a mutation in the genes responsible for aging had occurred, allowing the children's bodies to remain in a state of perpetual youth. Others suggested that the children might be suffering from some sort of metabolic disorder, one that caused their bodies to stop aging. But without access to modern genetic technology, such as DNA sequencing and gene editing tools, it was impossible to verify these theories. Even the most experienced scientists were left without answers, grappling with the profound mystery that lay before them. For the families, the growing presence of outsiders was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they hoped that the attention from scientists and researchers would lead to some sort of breakthrough, some discovery that might offer an explanation for their children's condition. On the other hand, the increasing number of strangers in the village felt intrusive. Their children were being treated as curiosities, as subjects to be studied and observed. The families, who had long kept their children's condition within the bounds of the community, were now forced to share them with the world. This sense of being studied, of being observed under a microscope, only added to the sense of isolation the children already felt. They were no longer just children. They were becoming subjects, symbols, mysteries to be solved, and in the process, they were losing the normality that once defined their lives. The villagers, too, began to feel the effects of the growing scientific interest. The once peaceful community was now a focal point for outsiders seeking answers. There were rumors and speculations, some of them grounded in science, others in superstition. The mystery of the children had become a kind of local legend, a story that was told and retold, with each telling adding its own layer of mystery and intrigue. But for those who lived in the village, the mystery was no longer just a story, it was a part of their lives, a part of their reality. The children, with their timeless youth, had become symbols of the unknown, a reminder that there was much in the world that could not be explained. They were both the beginning and the end of the story, a riddle that, no matter how many people tried to solve it, would remain unsolved. And as the years went on, the children continued to live in the same strange stasis, their lives frozen in time, a mystery that would never fade, no matter how hard the world tried to understand it. As the years went by, the impact of the children who stopped aging reached beyond the confines of the small village and the scientific community that was struggling to uncover the source of their condition. They became symbols of the unknown, not only in the village but in wider society. The unusual phenomenon sparked debates on an intellectual level and stirred deeply philosophical questions. It touched upon the nature of life itself, the immutable passage of time, and humanity's quest to master the forces that govern both. Their story reverberated through medical journals, philosophical discussions, and even the burgeoning field of genetics, which was beginning to understand, in its infancy, the complexities of human biology. Yet, despite the growing attention, the mystery surrounding these children remained unsolved, pushing the boundaries of knowledge further into the unknown. The children, as they grew older but remained frozen in their adolescent bodies, were constantly faced with the reality of their condition. They were trapped in an emotional and psychological paradox. Their bodies, while unaffected by aging, still carried the weight of their experiences. The passage of time, in terms of intellectual and emotional growth, continued to press upon them. But they were unable to grow physically or mature in the usual ways. This sense of frustration, of knowing that they were destined to live a life that was neither full childhood nor full adulthood, weighed heavily on them. They could understand the world, grasp complex ideas, and even experience deep emotional connections, but their appearances remained those of children. The tension between their minds and bodies created an identity crisis that was impossible to resolve. They were aware of the passage of time in ways that their peers could not comprehend, and yet they remained suspended in a moment, caught in a stasis that felt both unnatural and suffocating. This psychological burden was compounded by the way others perceived them. The villagers, who had once viewed them with awe and curiosity, began to see them as an enigma that existed beyond the human experience. They were not just children with a medical condition. They were something else, something that defied the natural laws of biology. This shift in perception was subtle but profound. At first, the children had been the subject of innocent fascination, a medical anomaly that could potentially be explained with the right tools and knowledge. But over time, as the years passed and the children remained unchanged, their presence began to evoke a sense of discomfort in the community. They were no longer just outliers in the human experience. They were living reminders of the limitations of science, the inability of human knowledge to explain everything. People no longer saw them as simply different. They were now seen as symbols of the unknown, of a cosmic riddle that could not be solved. For the children, this transformation in how they were perceived by others brought with it a sense of alienation. They had always been different, but now their difference seemed more profound. As they grew older mentally, they began to recognize that their conditions set them apart from everyone else in ways they couldn't fully explain. They were aware that they were being watched, studied, and discussed by others who, while not unfriendly, could not understand what it meant to live in their shoes. Their sense of isolation deepened as they realized that they could never truly be a part of the world around them. They could never join in the normal human experiences of aging, of growing up, of passing through the milestones of life that others would inevitably face. For the first time, the children understood that they were, in a very real sense, alone. No matter how much they yearned for connection or understanding, they would forever remain distanced from the lives of those around them, trapped in a cycle of perpetual youth. The mystery of the children's condition had long since surpassed the realm of medicine. What had started as a quest to find a scientific explanation had evolved into something more profound, touching on existential questions that were harder to answer. The idea that the children had stopped aging struck at the heart of what it meant to be human. Aging was the great equalizer. It was something everyone experienced, something that everyone would eventually succumb to. But these children were different. They had found a way to bypass time, at least on the surface. This act of defying nature created ripples that extended beyond the village. Writers, philosophers, and scientists alike began to use the children's story to illustrate larger truths about human existence. Some saw them as proof that human beings were not as bound by time as they thought. If these children could escape the ravages of age, what did that mean for humanity's future? Could it be possible to unlock the key to eternal youth? Could science, with its ever-expanding knowledge, find a way to cheat time itself? Others, however, viewed the children's agelessness with a sense of dread. There was something deeply unnerving about the idea of living forever in a state of perpetual youth. The very concept of aging was deeply entwined with the human experience. To deny it was to deny one of the most fundamental aspects of life. For many, the children's condition became a metaphor for something darker, a warning of the dangers of tampering with the natural course of life. They were no longer symbols of hope for eternal youth but were instead viewed as cautionary tales. In a world that was rapidly changing, that was seeing the rise of technology and medical advancements that seemed to promise an escape from the inevitability of death, the children stood as a stark reminder of how little humans truly understood about the forces that governed life and death. Meanwhile, the scientific community, though baffled by the children's condition, began to use them as an object of study. Doctors, biologists, and geneticists who had once worked independently now collaborated in the hopes of uncovering the secret behind the children's agelessness. But despite the growing number of theories, no one could come to a definitive conclusion. Some argued that the children were the result of some unknown genetic mutation, a deviation in the structure of their DNA that had allowed them to bypass the normal aging process. Others suggested that there might be an environmental factor at play, some unique combination of factors in the soil, the air, or the water that had contributed to their condition. But even the most sophisticated testing could not provide a clear answer. There was no trace of anything unusual in their genetic makeup. Their bodies were healthy, their blood work normal, and yet they did not age. Some scientists began to explore more esoteric theories. Could there be something more to the story than just biology? Could the children's condition be the result of a supernatural force, some unknown power that existed outside the realm of science? At a time when science was beginning to make incredible strides, this idea seemed almost absurd. And yet, there were some who clung to it. They wondered if the children's agelessness was not just a scientific anomaly but a sign of something greater, an omen of things to come, a glimpse into a future where humanity might no longer be subject to the constraints of biology. This idea, though far-fetched, gained traction among certain circles, especially those who had an interest in the occult or in unexplained mysteries. For the children themselves, the ongoing scientific investigations and the growing public interest in their condition only served to intensify their sense of alienation. They were no longer seen as just people. They were phenomena, objects to be studied, analyzed, and scrutinized. The medical community's unrelenting focus on them made it difficult for the children to form any sense of normality. They were forever trapped in a cycle of being both human and non-human, objects of fascination who could never fully be understood. The very essence of their being had become a question mark, and they were unable to escape it. As time went on, the children's situation became increasingly difficult to navigate. The psychological toll of their agelessness grew more pronounced. They had, in many ways, stopped being children long ago, their minds having developed in ways their bodies could not follow. They were intellectual beings, emotionally complex and fully aware of the world around them. But their inability to age, to experience the normal course of life, placed them in a constant state of yearning, a longing for something that could never be realized. The desires they harbored, romantic relationships, the experience of growing old, the joy of having children of their own, remained unreachable, forever out of their grasp. They were caught between two worlds, neither fully part of the one they lived in nor fully apart from it. And so, the mystery of these children continued to unfold, not as a singular scientific puzzle but as a broader existential question. They had become symbols of everything that science and society struggled to understand about the human condition. The more the world tried to define them, the more elusive they became. Time, it seemed, had no hold on them, yet they were still subject to its weight. As the children continued to live out their years, the world would look on with fascination, fear, and perhaps, even, envy, but always with the understanding that some mysteries were simply too vast to be unraveled. And in this mystery, the children remained eternal, forever existing in the space between time and timelessness.